We believe that we are acting on corruption.
Reviving fears of corruption at the highest levels of government. Why not just investigate?
We have got to take painful decisions to rectify the economy.
More than 2 years ago, Zimbabwe and its longtime ruling ZANU-PF party appeared to be turning a corner when Emmerson Mnangagwa took office and promised a break from nearly 4 decades of Robert Mugabe's brutal authoritarian rule and economic mismanagement. But hopes for a quick recovery have been dashed. The country now faces the worst economic and humanitarian crisis in a decade. And critics question the political will to stamp out rampant corruption and human rights abuses. My guest this week is Zimbabwe's Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Trade, Sibusiso Moyo. As a former army chief, he was also the face of the military coup that propelled Mnangagwa to power. Will Zimbabwe ever be able to see genuine political and economic reform? Foreign Minister Sibusiso Moyo, welcome to Conflict Zone.
Thank you.
You were the face of the military overthrow of Robert Mugabe back in 2017. As a commander, you got on television in your uniform to assure the public of a stable transition. Back then, you were the heroes of the hour. Now, you have an economy close to collapse with fuel, food, electricity shortages. Where is the hope in Zimbabwe right now?
Well, thank you very much, Sarah. Yes, the change in 2017 and the advent of the current government, which is the second dispensation, was as a result of a lot of issues. But among those was the issue of the economy. And the Second Republic took over an economy which had been in distress for many years, for different reasons. Some of the reasons could be sanctions, and then some of the reasons could be that of management. But let me say that there was hope, and there is still hope, because we have got to take painful decisions to rectify the economy from where it was. And these painful decisions are the ones which appear as if they are making people lose hope. But in reality, they are getting things right.
And I want to talk about, you mentioned sanctions, you mentioned management. Those are certainly issues that we're going to address. But right now, the IMF is saying that you're in an economic and humanitarian crisis, the worst economic crisis in more than a decade. Against that backdrop, I'd like to talk about the priorities of your government right now, because you have recently made headlines for splurging millions to purchase top-of-the-range vehicles for nearly 50 ambassadors across the globe, while the state is failing to pay civil servants a living wage. How can you justify such a spending spree when millions are facing hunger?
No, Sarah, the whole issue is based on the fundamentals. This economy has got very strong fundamentals. In fact, stronger fundamentals than what was there before. And only the issues which we are reforming at the moment, in as far as the economy is concerned, is to stabilize the currency. It has been the currency which has caused inflation. But as you are aware, we've introduced an auction system.
But Mr. Foreign Minister, just to bring it back to the issue, because ultimately you purchased these vehicles, and just to give our viewers a bit of context, they were between $40,000 and $50,000 per vehicle. When we're talking about the average civil servant, this is the middle class in your economy, they are making the equivalent of $1.80 a day. And you're purchasing $40,000 to $50,000 vehicles. Are you not out of tune with the priorities and the needs of your population? Wouldn't that money have been better spent elsewhere?
No, I'm not sure, Sarah, which vehicles you're talking about. The vehicles which...
the ones that you announced before the parliamentary committee.
We have had to ensure that our own diplomats are mobile. And that was quite a serious issue when we took over, because the conditions of our diplomats externally was a really state of collapse, because they were moving with Ubers, they were moving with something which is not appropriate for a diplomat who is assigned in a foreign mission. And therefore, buying vehicles for the diplomats was quite one of those measures which we were taking to address the situation of our diplomats.
But Foreign Minister, do you admit that it doesn't look good?
Ongoing.
It doesn't look good in an economy where 63% of the population live below the poverty line.
Yeah, but whatever the cost of those vehicles was not necessarily the issue which has caused the economy to be where it is. The economy has been like this. We are changing, we are reforming, and we are undertaking specific key decisions which are orientating the economy. And the key among them is the stabilization of the exchange rate. But we are also doing a lot of other economic reforms which ensures that even the investment community is free to come in within our mantra of Zimbabwe is open for business.
Let's talk a little bit more about that mantra and those reforms that you have been making in order to get the economy back on track. Because as you mentioned, you promised that the economy would be open for business. I'd like to begin on the economic front with your currency reforms, because a really big source of tension right now has been the reintroduction of your local currency last year after a decade of official use of the US dollar. Very quickly, that local currency rapidly lost value. It sent prices rocketing, raising fears of renewed hyperinflation. But you have been quoted as saying the following, that the return of the Zimbabwean dollar is basically stabilizing the economy from what it was. Is that really a message that's appropriate to send to the people of your country when the price of almost everything has ballooned? A loaf of bread can essentially gobble up a few weeks' pension?
Sarah, the scenario which is happening on the ground is that this economy had no monetary policy way of fixing it. It only had the fiscal side. And therefore, the two weapon systems of fixing the economy, both the fiscal and the monetary policy, had to be readjusted. And that's why we had to introduce our own currency. And our own currency is critical for our own people in terms of economic planning and in terms of expenditure. Yes, we are facing challenges because of the changes which are taking place. And the challenges have been that our currency was not stable. And therefore, we have been taking measures, such measures which are to stabilize our economy. And that's why we've introduced the...
Oh, excuse me, Foreign Minister. I just wanted to follow up with you and ask you, because to address some of this criticism, though, and the way that you rolled out this currency, because we have economists saying that you rushed to reintroduce it without the backing of a foreign currency. The IMF cites missteps in foreign exchange and monetary reforms that have failed to restore confidence. Chatham House also saying that it has had limited results. Do you have any regrets?
Not at all. In fact, it is appropriate, and it was an appropriate decision that we introduced our own currency, so that our own currency can operate side by side with foreign exchange operations. And that has been the desire of this government. So we are not necessarily trying to eliminate. Remember, we have been in this dollarization period for some time before. And this dollarization period ended up when there were cash shortages, when there were a lot of issues which were totally outside the control and the purview of the monetary authorities. Because of that, it was important that we reintroduce our currency, and our currency which is supposed to operate side by side with the US dollar.
Just briefly, Foreign Minister, I'd like to ask you, because you mentioned in the beginning of our conversation that one of the ills that is affecting your economy is sanctions. We've actually had your president saying that their impact on our daily lives is immeasurable, that the consequences are dire. But are they really? Because, or is your government just continuing to perpetuate a false narrative here as a convenient scapegoat? The United States, for example, says they only have 141 individuals or companies singled out in your country right now, in a country of 16 million.
Not at all, Sarah. The whole gamut of sanctions to this country has caused serious and unintended consequences. I have always called it a weapon of mass destruction, because the ZDERA which exists now is a statutory instrument or an act on Zimbabwe specifically, and that it shall not access any external support from either the IMF, World Bank, or other international financial institutions. And because of that, it means that the risk of a perceived risk of this country, whenever there is that hanging aspect of a sanction, means it is higher. It deters investors who would like to come into this country, despite the fact that Zimbabwe is open for business, which has been propagated by President Emmerson Mnangagwa. And therefore, we believe that the sanctions are now irrelevant in as far as the situation in Zimbabwe is concerned. But they are causing untold sufferings, not probably to the even leadership, but particularly to the total mass population and the people.
And that, sir, is refuted by the European Union and the United States. However, I would just like to ask you, because you're continuing with this narrative, and by blaming the West for your country's problems, aren't you actually shooting yourself in the foot? I mean, you mentioned that you need foreign capital, because the truth is you need re-engagement in order to improve your economy, which is saddled with billions of dollars in debt.
At the advent of the Second Republic, President Mnangagwa clearly articulated his foreign policy objectives, and that was re-engagement and engagement. Basically, he was saying we must be a friend to everyone, and that we must be an enemy to no one, and that Zimbabwe was open for business. And the whole objective of that process was to ensure that we are members of the family of nations who can trade and who can allow even any companies, particularly from the West, to come in and invest in Zimbabwe. And we're still encouraging, and that has been our objectives and our drive, to ensure that companies from the US, from European Union, from all these countries, from Germany, should come into Zimbabwe so that they can be able to invest and take opportunities. And I've been saying that Zimbabwe is probably presenting the best investment opportunity, primary investment opportunities for early movers in the international community.
However,
now,
that investment for many international partners, one of the precursors for that is the fact that many want you to tackle corruption in your country. On July 11th, President Mnangagwa, he declared war on corruption, as he did in 2017, post his takeover speech and in his inaugural speech after the 2018 election. So I would like to ask you, why should Zimbabweans and the international community believe that these are more than just shallow phrases? I mean, they're phrases that have been around for a while.
These are not just phrases. The president, when he particularly made his statement on the Anti-Corruption Day, was clear and in terms of direction, which we're talking in terms of corruption. And the corruption is something which we are acting on, and not just something which is theoretical. And you're aware that already 2 cabinet ministers have been arraigned, and a number of other officials and bureaucrats and everybody.
How is it not theoretical, Mr. Foreign Minister, when you've had more than 2 years in office and several arrests have been made, but there have been no convictions to date? No convictions to date. I mean, even the president acknowledges that there is a so-called catch and release system in place.
Yes. Remember, we have got separation of powers between the executive ourselves and the judiciary. And therefore, when people have been arrested and have been charged and everything, it is then there is a responsibility of the judiciary to handle the cases, particularly the prosecution side, so that it then deals with the cases they are being given court dates, and they are appearing in courts at the moment. And we believe that we are acting on corruption and not theorizing the whole process, as many people believe. In fact, it is the first time that corruption has been handled head-on in this country than ever before.
Okay, so let's look at a very high-profile case, a concrete case on corruption, and that is the case of Kunda Tagviri. He is the boss of Sakunda Holdings. It is said to have purchased buses from a Chinese company and then resold them to the government at twice the price. It's costing your citizens a lot of money. He apparently made a $54 million profit here. Tell us, is this an example of the type of business practice that needs to be investigated? Because there's talk that he got this contract without a proper process of procurement.
I think that is a misinformed position as far as we're concerned. And if there's been any such kind of complaint, it should have been reported to the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission. But that has not been.
It has been reported to the Anti-Corruption Commission. Two of your former youth leaders, in fact, reported it to your Anti-Corruption Commission. The IMF reportedly also privately warned Zimbabwe that the state payouts of Sakunda were, quote, undermining trust in the economy, pushing it to the brink, reviving fears of corruption at the highest levels of government. Why not just investigate? Is it because he's politically connected?
Not at all. In fact, if you're talking about the issue of buses, those buses were bought from an agent who is the supplier of and the representative of the bus company here in Zimbabwe, not even out of China direct, but through the agent who had supplied buses before into this country and who has had a standing contract. And these buses were bought when ordered and delivered, for that our transport system is efficient, more so under the COVID scenario.
So it sounds like no. It sounds like there won't be an investigation there.
And everything's above the...
So, Mr. Foreign Minister, then let me ask you about another case. Let me ask you about another case where everything does not appear to be above board. We also have to mention this high-profile case, which is currently ongoing, that your health minister, who was fired this month for inappropriate conduct after he was accused of illegally awarding a multi-million-dollar contract for COVID-19 medical supplies. And just to give a reference point, these masks were apparently costing the government $28 per mask. There's been public uproar over this. He's facing 15 years in prison if convicted. Will your citizens see real consequences?
Well, that is exactly the testimony of how the anti-corruption drive in this country is operating. Because he has been arrested and he has been charged, and therefore it means
but will he be caught and
when
released?
When an event occurs... No. It's not being caught and released. Remember, there's justice in this country. He is going to appear in court, and every evidence is going to be presented, and then it will be up to the judiciary either to convict him or not. But that is not the responsibility of the executive.
Okay, Mr. Foreign Minister, I'd like to turn to another issue now, and that is the issue of human rights, particularly the issue of freedom of assembly has been criticized in your country. The president has said that everyone in Zimbabwe has the right to express themselves freely, to criticize, to protest. But I'd just like to bring in one example, because these are the protests back in early 2019. Security forces responded reportedly with lethal force, killing at least 17 people, raping at least 17 women, shooting and injuring 81 people, arresting over 1,000 suspected protesters during door-to-door raids. That doesn't sound like an ideal condition for people to express themselves freely, or does it to you?
Well, let me assure you, Sarah, and all the viewers that this government and the constitution of this country clearly articulates all the rights of freedom of assembly, freedom of expression, and freedom of religion, and so on. And besides that, there's been quite a lot of emphasis in terms of embedding these rights among the people. But there is no freedom in the Constitution of violence demonstrations or protest. There is no freedom of burning people's cars and everything like that. But it must be the freedom which respects other people's rights as well.
Let's talk about other people's rights then.
Interfering
and also, just to acknowledge that the violence in this case was against the protesters. They were the ones who experienced the fatalities. But let's talk about the rights of others and turn to another case, a crackdown on dissent. And this happened in May, when 3 female opposition activists were on their way to participate in a peaceful protest organized by the opposition. They were reportedly stopped at a police checkpoint in Harare, subsequently abducted by state agents, tortured, sexually assaulted, a very high-profile case in your country. Is this what opposition leaders can expect in your country? They've subsequently been arrested themselves. They haven't even received an investigation into what happened to them.
Sarah, you must be very careful when you make these assertions, because in the first place, we are in the COVID period. And because of the COVID, you cannot have demonstrations of or assembly of over 50 people in town. Now, if you break the law in that regard, and you then cause danger to the rest of the population in terms of COVID infections, it means you are affecting other people's rights to life, which is not appropriate. And the other second issue is that you believe at the moment that state security agencies abducted those women. But this is a matter which is under investigation. And an interim report has actually been produced. Has actually been produced by the Minister of Home Affairs, which articulates clearly that this could be leading to one of those issues which is stage managed towards a particular international or regional event.
Okay, but the United Nations is calling for their release. It's also not my assessment. It's the assessment of the UN. But I'd just like to ask you, generally speaking, because international NGOs, they describe a lack of political will when it comes to instituting reforms in your country. I'd just like to quote Human Rights Watch. It says the following: Zimbabwe's failure to decisively deal with cases of abductions, disappearances, and torture severely undermines the standing of the country within the international community. The country needs to end impunity if Zimbabwe is to be respected. Failure to do so undermines the country's re-engagement efforts with the international community. How can you possibly convince the international community that Zimbabwe is open for business when these assessments are so damning?
I appreciate that. But Sarah, you must understand exactly where these are being propagated from and where are they coming from. Mainly the opposition in this country has got this strategy of attracting attention by stage managing events which should attract the international community eyes and concern. And in reality, when there's not been any of such an abduction, the example is the Magombe, the doctor, and even the current ladies is something which is under investigation, which I don't want you to continue really delving in it. But I can assure you that we have made reforms, and these reforms are taking place. You are aware that the West has been very concerned about the POSA, and that POSA has been repealed. The West has been concerned about IPA, and that IPA has been repealed. And there is progress in reforms. And we are saying that these reforms are not necessarily being undertaken for the sake of the international community or the Western capitals, but they are also being done for the benefit of our own people, so that they should benefit our own people. And this government, the Second Republic,
Zimbabwean Foreign
has
Minister,
been genuinely pursuing.
Zimbabwean Foreign Minister
Yes.
Sibusiso Moyo, we have to leave it there. Thank you for joining us on Conflict Zone.
Thank you, Sarah.